Hey, guys. Okay, so I know that at one time it was a statement made that the customer is always right. And then it updated or upgraded, elevated. I don't know which word you would put on it, but it went from, okay, so the customer may not always be right, but the customer is still a customer. And you want to make sure that you're providing great customer service. So, what does that look like now? I mean, with everybody going to digital e commerce, with everybody doing Zoom trainings and things of that nature, what does good customer service look like? What does great customer service look like? And is it still something that we as business owners can really provide that part, right? So, with that being said, this is a great episode for those of you who are just getting started when it comes to your business, or those of you who have been in that shift and are looking to kind of rebrand and restructure your customer journey. With that being said, I'm excited about my guest for today. Hello, Jim.
Hello, Altavis. How are you?
I am doing phenomenal. As someone who like puts service out there first when it comes to my clients,
Mhm.
man, I know that it has definitely taken some peaks and valleys during this year. So with that being said, let's start off. Tell the studio audience a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dive into the topic.
Terrific. And I just wonder, are your community members, your audience, are they easy speakers because they're listening and watching Speak Easy?
They're trying to be. They're working
They're
on
trying to be, aren't we all?
it.
Well, the brief on me is I help businesses and professional people learn how to grow their business by talking about it more effectively. And that's a combination of things that we can dive into just a little bit today. My background is really a mix. So I have been a professor and researcher. So I actually have a PhD. I have been a private company chief marketing officer, and for the last little more than a decade, I've spent a lot of time as a consultant and speaker and author, as you promote, to to really walk people through the concept of an everyday business conversation. So it can get so mixed up. People can talk about, well, it's customer service and it's customer experience and your messaging. Are we talking about a slogan or an ad or digital or and it's so big and mysterious and squishy sometimes. I prefer to think about conversations. So one to one or one to a few. And sometimes it can get into presentations and that as well. But really, what are the right words to say, questions to ask, the stories to tell when you're meeting with a customer or a prospect or someone that's important for you to grow your business or grow your charity or grow something that's important to you, and you're trying to get people on board and maybe spend money with you or maybe become a member or volunteer, whatever that thing is, wherever the conversation matters. That's what we want to work on, and just try to make it simple and more clear and more effective.
That's a great starting point, because let's be honest. So, those of you who know, Speakeasy podcast listeners, as the introvert, being the one to have those conversations was not at the top of my
Right.
list.
Well, you're the introverted entrepreneur, I think. I've heard you describe it, right?
Yes, like
Yeah.
that was never at the top of the list.
Right.
So speak to that a little bit. What for that person that's coming in and saying, okay, you mean I have to talk to people? What does that look like?
Well, there's something, and I don't know, Altavis, in your experience, if you've run across this as well, but I did a lot of research for my book that came out last year called The Science of Customer Connections. And I looked at research among speakers and great salespeople and others. And I've come to know, I know a lot of people who are entrepreneurs, they're business leaders, they're team leaders, they're professional speakers, some of whom get on stages in front of a few thousand people at a time. A lot of your listeners and viewers might be stunned at how many of those people are introverts, or at least they're on that side of the scale. And so, introversion doesn't really mean being shy. It doesn't really mean being unwilling or unable to have a conversation. It just tends, for most people who are on the introverted side of things, it just takes a lot of energy. It's draining for them. So you can do it, but then you need some time to recharge. And there are some ways that introverts actually have an advantage over more extroverted people. They tend to understand context better. They tend to pay attention more. That part comes more easily to them. So there was a study that I quote in the book that I found was really, really interesting, because for at least 2 generations, we have believed that the best salespeople are the extroverts, right? They're bulletproof. If it takes 101 calls to make a sale today, I'll make 102 calls, right? They'll get after it. But a few people decided to actually test this idea with real salespeople, and they examined how well they did, and they'd given them a personality test first. And they also looked at other factors, how experienced they were they cutting price, were they, how much did they work? So taking everything into account, what they found was that the introverts and the extroverts were just as effective in sales, but it was actually people in the middle who were the best. And so when you think about it, back to this whole notion of introversion and who can carry on a great conversation and who can speak and who can lead, all of that, my comfort that I can offer to you and your listeners and viewers, and this is not just empty like, oh, go out and get them. No, this is really based on science and experience, is that all of us are naturally wired for good conversation. And sometimes the extroverts don't do it as well because they tend to talk about themselves a little too much and they don't listen quite so well. So good conversation is give and take. And so whether you're thinking about you or your team or the people around you, don't sell yourself short. Don't sell anybody else short, and don't give them an easy excuse, because when it comes to everyday business conversations, we all have good wiring. We all have good capacity.
Definitely something to think about. I know for me, I tell times, I tell people, yeah, I definitely agree with having to have that time of regenerating ourselves after the
Yes.
conversations. But man, just finding how it works best for you. I had to find little things that drew people to me, because wasn't necessarily the one to go and chase down people, but when people would come and we would start a conversation, it definitely would turn out to be something really amazing. And I've been able to make some great connections over the years that have been significant and have lasted.
And you probably, with a lot of those great relationships, I'm just guessing, you weren't trying to sell them from the get-go. You weren't trying to impress them. You were just approaching it as, hey, this is somebody that's interesting, or maybe somebody that I can learn from, somebody that I might be able to help down the road. And I think our good business relationships are based a lot like our good personal relationships are. We're just trying to think about the other person, think about ways we can help each other. And then oftentimes the business opportunities flow from that. But it all starts with that willingness to engage in conversation. And as you say, sometimes, especially for the more introverted among us, and I'm kind of in the middle of that scale, that sometimes it's easier if in sales they'll call it a warm lead, or just the sense of that other person is kind of raise their hand and say, I'm interested in talking to you. So maybe someone who heard your podcast or read something that you wrote, or in the online world, responded to something that you posted, or you're introduced by somebody else who knows that you have something in common. So it's not always just going to a stranger that you don't have any connection to. So but playing upon that area of your genuine interest in the other person, and a confidence and clarity on what is valuable about you and what you can offer, right?
Now, another big thing is that a lot of people, especially now, you have a lot of coaches that tend to focus on the conversion, and they kind of miss some steps when it talks about, how you truly want to convert a client. So can you give a little insight into what that conversion process should really look like?
Well, I hate to say it depends, but it depends, right? So, um, sometimes if you're in a house of worship and on a Sunday and the minister says, who's gonna join up today, they want a conversion right then. But in most of business and a lot of the clients that I work with, they're selling something that's valuable, that may be a little complicated, and the sales cycle takes a while, maybe weeks, maybe months, maybe a year or more. And so, to your point, you got to be patient and you got to think through. When I think of good selling conversations, it starts from understanding what problem that you can help that other person solve or that other group of people solve. So oftentimes we've got our thing we're trying to sell, but we're really not in on what's the problem that we solve in the way that that prospective customer defines it, right? So what are they feeling? What's the language that they use? And so over time, what we need to do is help connect the dots to what they need to make better and how we would help specifically and what we would have to do together, how it can look on the other side of all that. And sometimes you get into conversations and you find it's really not a great fit. And that can be okay too, rather than having a bad relationship or a disappointment, something along those lines. And so that's why I focus a lot on less about pitching and less about converting, although converting is important, that's a result. But I think having a great set of customers or clients that's a great fit for you, you're paid what you're worth, everybody is delighted with what happens, and you grow your fan base over time, is probably the product of lots of good individual conversations over time. And that's what we want to, what I try to do in my work, and try to help people do, is just bring some consistency to it and give them some easy tips and things and support for just knowing and being comfortable what they can say and what they can do in conversations, and the people around them too, because there are a lot of things that get in the way.
Oh, that definitely. I think those are some of the healthy habits, that you can have as a business owner that aren't really always discussed in the beginning. I know Speakeasy podcast listeners, a lot of you are within that first 5-year range. Maybe even, it's maybe you're not in the first 5-year range, but you're at a point where you're about to rebrand, and it's kind of almost like you're restarting. And so these are the key elements, the foundation for you to be able to build something strong on. And I think, even when we look at some of the companies that ended up closing their doors, a lot of the basic things that got them, to where they were things that they were no longer doing. It was things that were being automated, or it didn't have that same touch. And so it played a really big impact when it mattered most.
That's right. And the ways that you can help change over time, the things that people need change over time. So oftentimes what I find is companies and people and teams, and they've been doing what they're doing, and they're good at what they do, but the conversations change. So their buyers need something different, or they have more products to sell and they find people aren't buying the new stuff. Maybe they're stuck in the old stuff. Or everyone's just gotten a little too comfortable in telling the same stories and doing things in the same way. And so you have to approach it in a fresh way, whether you're just starting out and or you're changing. And how many of us are changing? They're either doing a side deal, or professionally they're changing. And so you need to make sure that you're confident and set in your own mind about the specific ways that you can help in what you do, and letting your network know about it too, your relationships, and so people can talk you up in a consistent way as well.
Oh, I like that tip. I hope you guys were listening to that. Make sure that if you missed it, it's okay. They have a rewind button. You just press rewind and press play again. So that way you can listen to that tip. It's definitely a very valuable one. Now, what led to the book? Because I know that for some people, when they talk about a topic such as this, it's because they had either a really, really good experience or they had a really, really bad experience. And they're like, gotta document that.
Well, as you know, there are lots of reasons, professional reasons, to write a book, and there are processes to go through and do a good one. But you have to have a spark. There has to be some reason, because it ain't easy, and it does take some time. Um, and so for me, it was about 3 or 4 years ago, and I was actually listening to another consultant talk about um, areas within business, and I was thinking, Altaviz, what is it? Because so often I'd have really good business people or really good companies that would say, why is this so hard? Why can't we all get on the same page? Why is everyone telling their own story? Why is it if we get a question from a customer or a prospect, everyone's deer in the headlights? Why? What's so hard about it? And so I thought, in a very simple way, what is it that separates those who are good, really good at their everyday business message versus the rest of us, right? And it's not that they're perfect. It's not that they're necessarily highly trained, or it's not, as we talked about, it's not that they're great extroverts or anything like that. It's is that they manage to combine three things. They have a message that's conversational and worth sharing. The second thing is they are very intentional about their, what I call the messengers. So it may be their employees, their current customers, their friends, their fan base. And so there are people other than them talking about them out in everyday conversations. And then the third part is they have some management habits, some habits that they follow themselves, and some habits that their teams go through to keep it fresh, so that they can practice and support one another. And when new people come into the team, they make sure that they're up to speed quickly, right? So message, messengers, and management. And I thought, that's it. And so wouldn't it be helpful if I could put together a book that would follow, other programs and things that I do, that basically would walk people through this bit by bit and say, if you want to get a handle on it, to have something that's more clear and is spread more widely and is more consistent, how would you do it? You're doing it for yourself, or you bring in somebody else, doesn't matter. And so that's what I did with Science of Customer Connections. I broke it into 3 sections: message, messengers, and management. And then a final chapter that gave some examples and stories about people and companies who had gone through and what it was worth to them. So I just encourage you. I know you talk to your listeners a lot about the power of books and the power of speaking and all that. And just I'll offer a little encouragement that if you've got something that you know how to do, or you've got a point of view that is really valuable, think through doing it. It's a great way to organize your brain, organize your ideas, and dispense them to the world in a way that they can understand and use.
I love how you put that. Oh my goodness, I absolutely love that.
Well, it's
Yes,
messaging.
that's it. That's messaging. I often tell people that, listen, if you're an entrepreneur, you can also be an author and a speaker, but definitely if you're an author and a speaker, you are an entrepreneur. And so we always have to look at the business aspect of this whole process. Don't get discouraged. Don't, even if things don't look the way you thought they were going to look when you put your ideas on your vision board at the beginning of 2020, it's okay. But I think along the way, as we learn and grow, you can definitely still pick things up. You can still make adjustments. You can still make this a successful year. Speakeasy listeners, I know that you have been taking some great notes. And again, if you haven't, make sure that you go back and check it out again, or save it, download it, so that way you can get these tips and resources. And so, Jim, let them know how they can reach out to you for more information and how they can get the book.
Well, and I hope that you will offer a link in your notes, because the toughest thing for your listeners is the spelling of my last name. It's pronounced Karrh. It's spelled Karrh. I'm at jimkarrh.com. I have purchased the URLs for some of the ways that it's most commonly misspelled. So if you get close, you'll get there. And so I've got a sample from my book. My book is available in all the usual places, as well as an audiobook version. And I also have a podcast. These podcasts are great, aren't they? Yes. Mine's maybe not quite as good as yours, but mine is called the Manage Your Message podcast. And so if people can listen to that, again, they can check out a lot of free resources on my website and connect with me on LinkedIn. I tend to hang out there more than other platforms, a little bit on Twitter as well. But any way that I could offer some support, be a sounding board, or have a connection, I'd really enjoy doing.
Yes, one of the things that we've been talking about is how, small businesses and entrepreneurs have really been missing the mark because they don't realize the power of podcasting. But that's another episode.
Another episode, just another thing to consider out there.
Right? It's another thing to consider because there have been many small businesses and entrepreneurs who have been able to double and triple their revenue through the use of podcast interviews, having their own show, or just being on other people's shows. And we talked about, we dropped this wonderful word earlier in the episode, networking, and having those conversations. Guess what? This is the perfect platform for that. So I thank you so much for having me. Look, for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me. This is a pleasure. Love to get back together again soon, and it's a real honor to be speaking with you and virtually, kind of almost speaking with people who really have a lot of passion about what they do and just want to do it better and offer more to the world.
That makes it all the better. It changes everything. So Speak Easy podcast listeners, we appreciate you because, again, without the Speak Easy podcast listeners, there would be no Speak Easy podcast. So join the conversation. Make sure you leave us a review, bit.ly/Speak Easy podcast show. And we look forward to hearing how this episode resonated with you. With that being said, until next time, guys, don't forget to press it out. See ya.